yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sarirasya cha vaitikena yopakrotam pravaram muninam Patanjali pranjaliranatosmi stuve Patanjalim vyasam shankaram cha munitrayam katra sutrasya bhashyasya krama vivaranasya cha. So we were discussing 15th Sutra of Kaivalyapada, which is a very important one from the standpoint of comparative philosophy, especially the contrast between the Vijnanavada, the Yogacara system, and Sankhya Yoga tradition. The Sankhya and Yoga traditions believe in the reality of external objects. So it is a system of realism, and the Vijnanavada, subjective idealism, it's called Yogacara system, believes that the external objects are unreal. That's a central point that we discussed. The sutra is Nacha ekachitta tantram vastu tada pramanagam tada kim syad. So, I mentioned earlier that according to the Vijnanavada school of philosophy, an external object has a reality only so long as we are aware of it. Its existence, ontological existence, depends upon our awareness. So the yoga system contradicts this theory by saying that nacha ekachitta tantram. So an object may be within the awareness realm of one individual and may not be in the awareness of another individual. So there is this contrast. So that shows that it has got a ontological existence, reality, independent of whether we are aware of it or not. Of course, there are other aspects related to this philosophy which we discussed already earlier. The 16th sutra is Tad uparagapekshitatvat chittasya vastu jnata ajnatam. These are two different Vedas are there. The most popular version is Tad uparagapekshitvad. Both are the same. The idea is, of course, this again, it has something to do with the fundamental epistemology of Vedanta philosophy. The central principle is you are aware of something only when the chittam, our mind, connects with external objects through the senses. So that's the idea behind. Then we come to know of certain things. When our mind is not able to connect with an external object through the senses, then we are not aware of it. It's a common principle. See, when our mind connects with a visual object through the eyes, the sense of, with the indriya sense of, with the sense of sight, then we become aware of the objects, the visual objects. When the mind is not able to connect with the sense object through the sense of sight, that is eyes, then we are not to be aware of it. Now, this is a interesting sutra, so I shall just read Vyasa's commentary on this. So the central principle is this: mind depends upon the coloring by the object. In other words, the object should color our mind. So there are many examples given in the commentaries. For example, water. When water is poured into a glass, that water takes the object, takes the shape of that instrument into which it is poured. When water is spread over a field, a rectangular field or a circle, the water takes the form of the field depending upon the shape. When the water is poured into a glass, it takes the form of the glass. It doesn't have its own its own shape. Similarly, when mind connects with an object, it takes that form, and then we become aware of it. So Vyasa's commentary is very important here. The simple principle is objects are known when mind connects with that object, with the senses. And the example is when water pours into the field, then the water takes the field, the water is poured into glass, it takes the form of a glass. There's something to do with the concept of emptying the mind, which is used in some schools of mindfulness, which we'll discuss later. So the bhashya is ayaskanta manikalpa vishayaha ayasadharmagam chittam abhisambantya uparanjayanti yenacha vishena uparaktam chittam sa vishayo jnataha tataho tattata anyaha punar ajnataha. That's the point. I mean, here mind, the idea is mind is known or unknown depending upon its coloring. So when mind is colored by the object, that mind becomes aware of it. When mind is not colored by the object, it is not aware, it's not aware of it. So here the objects are compared to a magnet and mind is compared to iron. So objects are like magnet and mind is iron. So ayaskanta manikalpa vishayaha. So ayaskandamani means magnet. Objects are like magnet. Ayasadharmagam chittam. And chittam or mind is comparable to iron. Abhisambandhya uparanjayanti. So the object with which the mind becomes related, that object comes to be known. When the mind is not connected to the object, then that object remains unknown. In other words, when mind gets into contact with an object, or both are also correct, when the object gets into contact with the mind, then the object is known. When it is not able to get into contact with the mind, that object is unknown. Now, here, of course, this is simple sutra and the bhashya also very simple. But the deeper implication about this, that's what I'm going to concentrate on. It is an important thing to remember for us to know the real meaning of the 18th sutra, which is not elaborately discussed by Vyasa, but Swami Vivekananda gives a long description of the 18th sutra, which actually establishes the reality of Purusha. From 18th to 23rd sutra, Patanjali is trying to establish that there is a Purusha, which is the unchanging reality. Everything else is subject to changes. Everything else, including mind and all objects, all are mutable. They are all evolutes of Prakriti. Purusha is aparinami, which will not undergo any change. So, from this 17th sutra, there are a few things to be remembered. You must have heard of this principle of concentration in Zen Buddhism and also some schools of ancient meditative techniques in the Vajrayana, Mahayana, which are prevalent in the Far Eastern countries. Of course, originally it came from the subjective idealism or Yogacara system of Buddhism. What do you mean by going beyond mind? Because this is in Buddhism. The same you find in Vedanta, but from a different angle. Yogaha chitta vritti nirodhaha. This is the definition of yoga. Yoga is nothing but transcending, going beyond chitta vritti. Now, how do we enjoy the tranquility, the peace, that the state of going beyond fluctuations, going beyond vrittis, going beyond waverings, going beyond this happiness and unhappiness created by the momentary objects, by going beyond vrittis. And this is put in another word, it's called vritti nirodha, and in Buddhist tradition it's sometimes called emptying the mind. When you empty the mind, what is happening is you are actually transcending the fluctuations of the mind. So mind, you should remember, mind is not an entity. Mind is a phenomenon that we call to the natural waverings and fluctuations of our emotions and feelings, which are again vrittis. So when there is more than one vritti, there will be always waverings. There will be always conflicts. When we go beyond vrittis, and vrittis are completely transcended, then mind is actually emptied of all contents. Which means mind doesn't have its own obsessions. Mind is not obsessed with anything. Such persons will be able to concentrate on anything at will. In fact, that is one of the vibhudis of yoga. In fact, one of the most visible and direct consequences of the practice of yoga or meditation is the ability to focus on an object or an idea for a long time, and once you are able to do that, you can register that in your mind very deeply. The concentration here means all the five senses which normally drag the mind towards an object, those five senses are all drawn within. For example, when you are reading a book, normally people who are highly disturbed, this attention focus is very limited in this modern age because of so many subjects, so many conflicting topics, so people are highly disturbed. So you cannot remain concentrated on one idea for a very long time. So we need to change from one to another, especially in information technology. But if you practice yoga meditation, one most visible and natural result will be your ability to focus on something for a long time, and you are able to remember something for a long time. And again, this remembrance and focus is not because of your interest, but because you want to focus on it. There are two types of concentrations, dharana. The natural dharana, that is the sixth stage in Ashtanga Yoga, dharana, dhyana, samadhi. The natural dharana is nothing but the mind getting attracted towards something because of the natural attraction. A person who is interested in football can concentrate on football because he's strongly obsessed with that. But there is no mastery in it. That concentration is not the concentration of a master. It's a concentration of a slave. You're dragged into something. So children watching the TV, if you switch off the TV, children get disturbed. They want to see that again. So there, the concentration is not the concentration of a master. But a yogi can direct his power of concentration into whatever object he wants, with full will, with full mastery, with full freedom. That's the dividing line. Now, when a person practices this vritti nirodha or yoga or concentration, actually any kind of obsession of the mind's natural aversion to certain things, and its opposite, infatuation to certain other things, that is completely gone. Which means that mind is like water. You pour water in a glass, it takes the form of a glass. You pour that water you direct water to a field, it takes the form of field. This is often used by, without being aware of it, perhaps without understanding its connection with yoga, it has been used in some kinds of martial arts techniques where they try to focus exclusively on that single point action, whole body, weight and concentration, everything is focused on one object. So that is the real meaning of yoga, chitta vritti nirodha. So after this, I will take up the 18th sutra. 18th sutra is important because from 18th sutra onwards, Patanjali is trying to focus on Purusha, leaving the realm of Prakriti and its evolutes behind. Chittam is one of the evolutes actually. Chittam is a product, it is one of the evolute of the Sattvika Ahankara. We have to remember the evolution from Prakriti, Mahatattva, cosmic intelligence, and from there Ahankara, and Ahankara has three dimensions, Sattvika, Rajasika and Tamasika. From Tamasika Ahankara, the external phenomenal world of objects emerge. From Rajasika Ahankara, all the senses, and from Sattvika Ahankara, mind emerges. It's called Chittam. So it is also one of the evolutes of Prakriti. From 18th Sutra onwards, so you can find Swamiji begins to give a long interpretation. Actually, Vyasa's commentary is very, very brief, 18th Sutra, but Swami Vivekananda gives a very elaborate interpretation. Well, before that, of course, there is one 70th Sutra that's also very important. So I shall take the 17th Sutra. Sada jnadas chittavrittayaha prabhoho purushasya abarinamitvat. That's the beginning of the discussion of the reality of Purusha from 17th Sutra to 23rd Sutra. So the 17th Sutra discusses that Purusha is Drashta, the ultimate seer. The 18th Sutra points out that Chittam is Jada, is just an evolute of Prakriti. The 19th Sutra points out that again it also repeats the same idea. It reminds us again that Chittam is Jada or is non-effulgent. And the 20th Sutra, it points out the fact that our intellect, buddhi cannot be drashta. The 21st Sutra says the real drashta is Purusha. And then this 22nd Sutra again says the Chittam is getting its effulgence only from Purusha. It is not Swaprakasha. Mind or Chittam is not self-effulgent. Its effulgence comes from another source, that is Purusha. And the 23rd Sutra repeats the idea again that Chittam becomes effulgent. Effulgence here means the ability to understand, the ability to be aware of something. Chittam by itself is one of the evolutes of Prakriti, and Prakriti is Jada, non-effulgent. So Chittam or mind by itself cannot be effulgent, cannot be Chetanam. It can be Achetana, means it is Jada. But it derives its effulgence from Purusha. Therefore, Chitta also becomes endowed with the ability to be aware of other things. So this is an elaborate discussion from 17th to 23rd Sutra. So I would like to discuss Swamiji's interpretation of the 17th Sutra. The 17th Sutra is this. Sada Jnadas Chitta Vritteha Tat Prabhoga Purushasya Aparinamitvat. So the prose order is Chitta Vritteha, means vrittis of Chitta that we have been discussing. Tat Prabhoga, I mean, the Prabhu means overlord, the master. Who is the master of mind? The master of the mind is the source of the effulgence from which the mind gets its ability to manifest. That is Purusha. Purushasya sada jnata. So Chittam is jnata. Jnata means something that is seen, known, an object that is perceived. That's the meaning of jnata. Jnata means something which is known. Not jnata as karta, but jnata as something that is perceived. Jnataha, when the visarga is there, means it's an object. So even mind is an object for Purusha. Object, external objects like the ocean, the river, the water, the chair, the book in front of you is an object for the mind, because you are seeing the chair in front of you by using the eyes, and so the mind, when it connects with the chair through the eyes, becomes aware of the existence of the chair. Now behind that mind there is a seer. So far the chair is concerned, mind is the seer, the perceiver. But so far as the mind is concerned, mind itself is an object, and the seer, the subject, the perceiver of mind is Purusha. So this is the connection. So Purusha is the source of all effulgence. From Purusha, mind or buddhi derives its ability to connect with the chair in front of you through the eyes. If the mind is tameva bhandam anubhadi sarvam tasya bhasa sarvamidam vibhadi, kind of the Upanishad's mantra is there. It is that Atman. Okay, this is Vedanta. It's a Upanishad mantra. It comes in the Kathopanishad. So that Atman, it is the one which makes everything effulgent, which gives effulgence, which makes everything manifest. That Atman. Tasya bhasa. By the effulgence of the Atman, everything becomes known. That's the idea behind. So this should be remembered correctly. Now after this, you find Swamiji in a masterful way, Swamiji explains the aparinamitvat. Aparinami means something or somebody who is not a parinami. It doesn't undergo any parinama. Parinama means change, modification. Parinama actually means real modification, real change. So Purushasya aparinamitvat. So Purusha is the master. And so far as Purusha is concerned, mind is an object. Purusha is the subject. Purusha is the seer, mind is the seeing. Purusha is the subject, mind is only an object. So, sada jnataha. And this Purusha is always aware of everything. Everything is known to Purusha. Everything is an object seen by Purusha. Sada jnataha. Chitta vrittayaha. Remember, chittam and chitta vrittaya. You have to remember, chittasya vrittayaha. Means Shashti Vibhakti. Vrittis of chitta and chittam. Actually, chitta or mind cannot be separated from chitta vritti. And this is an important thing to remember. There is no chittam as such distinct from chitta vritti. That's saying there is no ocean distinct from the waves and pebbles that you find in the ocean. So, actually, of course, the comparison is not absolutely accurate because ocean can exist without waves, of course. But mind or chittam cannot really exist without vrittis. When vrittis are gone, you go beyond mind. Going beyond mind actually means chitta vritti nirodha in the language of yoga. In the language of Vedanta, it actually means, according to books like Drik Drishya Viveka, Tattva Bodha, and then of course Gaudapada Kariga, and Yoga Vasishta, and many poetical works of Shankaracharya like in fact, whatever you find, everything that you see in the external world is nothing but a mirror of your own self. You can find this idea throughout Shankaracharya's stotras you find. So, sadajñātāha cittavritteha. Cittavritteha sadajñātāha. All cittavrittis, chittam itself and cittavritti are the same, always jnātāha. The word plural jnātāha is used only because cittavritteha, the plural is used. Otherwise, chittam jnātam, that also will be equally correct. For what? Tat prabhoho, for its master, master of chitta. Who is the master of chitta? Is Purusha. And that Purusha is aparinami. Unlike chittam, Purusha is aparinami. So Swamiji says, the states of the mind are always known. That chitta vrittaya always known, jnātāha. Because the Lord of the mind, Purusha, is unchangeable. This is Swami Vivekananda. So he continues. The whole gist of this theory is that the universe is both mental and material. Mental means chittam, material means all the vrittis, everything that we experience, connect with through our senses. Both of these are in a continuous state of flux. What is this book? It's a combination of molecules of constant change. One lot is going out and another coming in is a whirlpool. But what makes the unity, what makes it the same book, the changes are rhythmical. In harmonious order, they are sending impressions to my mind, and these pieced together make a continuous picture, although parts are continuously changing. Mind itself is continuously changing. The mind and body are like two layers in the same substance, moving at different rates of speed. Mind and body means chittam and objects in the language of Patanjali. Vishaya. The object is Vishaya in the language of Patanjali. Relatively, one being slower and other being quicker, we can distinguish these two motions. So, now listen, this is the idea behind. Purusha, according to Yoga Sutra, is an aparinami. It stays stable. Absolutely no change, no modification. What about mind, that is chittam, and objects, vishayas? Mind is moving faster. Objects don't move as fast as the mind. Now you cannot really identify or experience change unless you yourself don't change or beyond change, or you change slowly and what you perceive changes faster. For example, if there are two trains, one train is moving slowly, the other is moving faster. Maybe you feel the change, you feel the speed, if you are sitting in a train that is moving slowly, you feel the movement of the train that is moving faster. If the two trains are moving the same speed, you don't feel the change. So if you want to feel that the speed of the other train, then the train on which you are sitting should be moving slowly. Now, change is incomprehensible, unintelligible unless there is something which is relatively unchanging. So, if you want to understand the change of the objects, the Vishayas, you can do that because mind can understand it. But mind also is changing according to Sankhya Yoga system. So, who will experience the movement or the change, the mutability of mind? For that there should be somebody who is totally unchanging, beyond all changes. And that should be somebody who is not at all, who is never changing, who is beyond change. That is Purusha. Otherwise, you have to look for another mind which moves at a different level of speed to recognize the change of one chittam. So one chittam behind another chittam, like that you have to go on analyzing. It is not possible. So it leads to anavastha dosha. That is a particular kind of idea that you find here. This again is discussed in the 20th sutra. Anavastha dosha means it is ad infinitum, just like the tree and its fruit. What came first? The hen and the egg. Who came first? There is no real answer to that question. Without a tree, there cannot be fruit. Without the fruit and the seed from the fruit, there cannot be tree. So there is no real answer to that question. So the only way to come to a logical conclusion is there should be something who is aparinami, who doesn't change at all, who doesn't undergo any parinama, and that is Purusha. And this Purusha, according to Vivekananda, Swami Vivekananda, interpreting Yoga Sutras, he connects this Purusha ideal to the Atman concept of Vedanta. As I mentioned earlier many times, Yoga Sutra in its metaphysical conclusions makes sense only when you understand it in the light of Vedanta. So at some point, you have to admit that what Patanjali is talking about when he talks about Purusha is actually talking about Atman. Of course, there are, in the Brahma Sutra Bhashya of Shankaracharya takes pains to prove that Patanjali's Purusha, as Patanjali explains it, is not Atman. But Patanjali's Purusha, it should be properly understood, not as Patanjali understands it. That's you remember, you have to give allowance to this problem. Patanjali's system is a bit illogical in his conclusion because he is talking about a Purusha who doesn't undergo any change, who is totally uninvolved in the evolution. But at the same time, the Purusha is the witness. Prakriti is the source of evolution, but Prakriti is non-effulgent. So how can this universe emerge from a substance which is essentially non-effulgent? That's the logical there's a refutation of the Sankhya system. Prakriti, or Pradhanam as it's called, is non-effulgent, Jada. Strilinga is Jada Prakriti. Purusha is Chaitanyam, is effulgent. The entire universe, your mind, your intellect, with which you study Vedanta and Yoga, with which you meditate, all these are evolutes of this Prakriti which is non-effulgent, which is Jada. How can something which is essentially non-effulgent be the source of evolution? And also the source of evolutes like our own intellect and mind, with which we do spiritual practices and realize the Brahman. So that's a logical fallacy of the Sankhya system. So based on this argument, Shankaracharya refutes the conclusions of Sankhya system, but not the details like Mahatattva, Ahankara, all these things are understood. And yoga psychology, Sankhya psychology is both are the same more or less, is fully recognized in Vedanta, but not the metaphysical conclusions of yoga and Sankhya. That's the idea of it. So Swamiji continues here. For instance, a train is in motion and a carriage is moving alongside it. It is possible to find the motion of both these to a certain extent, but still something else is necessary. Motion can only be perceived when there is something else which is not moving, Swamiji says. But when two or three things are relatively moving, we first perceive the motion of the faster one, and then that of the slower ones. How is the mind to perceive? It is also in a flux. That's true. So when something is moving faster, the momentum, the speed will catch our attention, and we perceive the momentum, the speed of the object that is moving faster. And then we perceive the moment of something which is closest to that speed, and then something which is still closest to the other speed. Like that, we have to, again and again, have to come down. How is the mind to perceive it? But when two or three things are relatively moving, we first perceive the motion of the faster one, and then that of the slower ones. How is the mind to perceive? It also in a flux. So of course the mind is changing, because mind is also an evolute of Prakriti. It's also Parinami. And the external objects are also evolutes of Prakriti. And both are moving, both are changing, both are subject to Parinama. Therefore another thing is necessary which moves more slowly. Then you must get to something in which the motion is still slower, and so on, you'll find no end. So you have to conceive of something which is beyond the very idea of motion, the very idea of Parinama. And that is Purusha, which is aparinami. This is a logical conclusion. Therefore, logic compels you to stop somewhere. You must complete the series by knowing something which never changes. Behind this never-changing chain of motion is the Purusha, the changeless. This aparinami, that's the word used in the sutra. Purushasya aparinamitva. Because Purusha is aparinami, changeless. That's why chitta-vritteha sada jnataha. That's why all vrittis of chittam are known, perceived by Purusha, because Purusha is absolutely, totally free from change or motion. Behind this never-changing chain of motion is the Purusha, the changeless, the colorless, the pure. All these impressions are purely reflected upon it, as a magic lantern throws images upon a screen without in any way tarnishing it. So, all that is happening at the Prakriti level, at the level of different evolutes, including the Chittam and the external objects. All these are just like shadows or impressions which are reflected, like a magic lantern throws images upon a screen. It doesn't affect a screen. The screen is totally free from any influence. But all these are seen. So that actually takes you very close to the Vedantic idea of Maya. Everything is there, but won't be there for too long. So the Vyavaharika Satta, everything is, so the whole universe, all that we experience are just like impressions thrown by a magic lantern on a screen. The screen is there, but the impressions don't remain there for too long. Maybe what we experience, we may experience for several decades. But qualitatively, seeing or experiencing something for a few seconds or minutes or hours, or maybe for 100 years, that's the age of a healthy person maybe, there is no difference. Difference in degrees, that's all. It doesn't make any change. It is I know it's a bit too abstract, but the point is that's the only solution for the problems of world and problems of life. To understand the fact, everything is an impression thrown on the screen by a magic lantern. That's what Shankaracharya says in his commentary on the Mandukya Karika. He talks about creation. Creation is just like a magician who comes to a king's court. So we find an 8th century work like Shankaracharya's commentary describing this Indian rope magic. That's what is referred to in the Mandukya Karika Bhashya, it is called. Shankaracharya explains that. So, a magician comes to a court and he's a great magician. He creates an illusion, or an illusion that may be better. It is an optical and also visual hallucination or illusion. He says he has got an emergency call from heaven where the evil forces are attacking the world, the kingdom of angels. So he has got an SOS, the magician. He says he has to go to heaven and assist the angels, devas, in their fight against the evil forces. And after some time, he comes down. He throws a rope to the sky, and in the presence of all the onlookers, including the king, he climbs the rope, disappears. After some time, a huge battle is going on. You can hear the clash of weapons, and he is cut into pieces. He falls down in different pieces. So people are shocked. But after some time, he is standing there, smiling. Now everything is gone. It's all the same. But for 2 hours, people thought terrible things were happening in heaven. For 2 hours, they were in a different world. But don't we understand this is what is happening when we go to a movie, when we go to Disneyland? For 2 hours, 3 hours in a different world. We really, unreal really speaking. But this life on earth is a Disney world experience lasting for 100 years or 90 years depending upon our lifespan. So Swamiji says, behind this never-ending chain of motion is the Purusha, the changeless, the colorless, the pure. The screen. All these impressions are merely reflected upon it. Purusha is like a screen. If we can really understand this as a fact, we can smile. It can be an everyday celebration for everyone. There is no occasion for anyone to get depression, worry or anxiety or anything. In fact, this is the only ultimate solution for problems of this world. That's what Swamiji says in some context. Today this morning we had a discussion on, this Swami Vivekananda in San Francisco, where I quoted a statement from Swamiji. Swamiji asked this question. They were standing in the middle of the market street, this in 1900, mind you, with a lot of small vehicles moving about, a lot of chaos around, very crowded street. Looking at them, can you feel an intense tranquility and peace, a meditative mood into you? Then only you are actually a yogi, not otherwise, Swamiji says. So this is one experience. So when you are looking at these pictures, impressions falling on the screen, you should remember actually only the screen is real, the impressions are unreal. So that's the idea behind. So that's Swamiji somehow takes Patanjali closer to the reality of Advaita. Remember, Patanjali, we don't know whether Patanjali actually meant this or not, but Vivekananda made a very sensible interpretation of many of Patanjali's views here. So that is one. The next one is also very important. That is the 18th Sutra. It's a continuation of Patanjali's efforts to establish that there is this absolute effulgent, self-effulgent, unchanging reality called Purusha. Na tat swabhasam drishyatvad. Tat here means chittam. Na tat swabhasam. Swabhasam means suprakasam, means self-effulgent. It doesn't need to be made effulgent by something else or somebody else. Atman or Brahman is the only swabhasam or suprakasham according to Vedanta. According to Yoga, Purusha is the self-effulgent one. But Chittam is not self-effulgent. That is the emphasis on the 18th Sutra. Chittam is not suprakasham. The reason is, it is only a drishya. Drishya means is an object seen by a seer. The seer is Purusha, Chittam is only an object. Just as a tree in front of you is an object, your mind is the seer, but behind your mind there is the real seer, drashta, we call the perceiver. That is Purusha. So this mind which is seeing the tree in front of you is not the real seer. So it gets its effulgence, the ability to perceive only from another source, and that source is Purusha. The drishyatvad, because Chittam is a drishya. Chittam is something, drishya means something that is seen, that is perceived. It is object. The seer, the perceiver, subject is somebody else. What is seen naturally cannot be self-effulgent. That's the idea behind it. A self-effulgent reality cannot be seen by anybody, because there cannot be more than one self-effulgent reality according to Vedanta. But Yoga and Sankhya believe in the multiplicity of Purushas, but Advaita Vedanta believes in the unity and oneness of Atman. That's why Swamiji somehow connects the Purusha concept of yoga with the Vedantic concept of Atman. So we have to understand this very clearly. Those of you who read Shankaracharya's Bhashya, you may see a contradiction. It is not a contradiction, it should be clearly understood. I want to make this point very, very clear. The important point to remember is, in the Shankaracharya's Bhashya, Brihadaranyaka, Chandogya, and more importantly in Brahma Sutra Bhashya, there are long discussions between the Sankhya view, which is not different from Yoga view, and the Vedantic view. And he takes pains to establish the fact the Sankhya concept of Purusha is not an absolute reality. It is not equivalent to the Atman concept of Advaita Vedanta. The reason is, in Sankhya system, Purusha is self-effulgent. There are so many Purushas, multiplicity of Purushas. There cannot be more than one ultimate original source of self-effulgence. And again, this Purusha is inactive. Purusha is uninvolved. And there is another permanent, eternal reality. That's why it is a pluralistic system. It is the dualistic system. Pluralism means more than one reality, a system of philosophy that accepts more than one absolute reality, one absolute category. So Sankhya accepts two fundamental absolute categories. So it's called pluralism. That is Purusha and Prakriti. Prakriti is the source of creation. Prakriti is the source of evolution. Prakriti is also non-effulgent, but active. How can something which is essentially non-effulgent be the source of creation? It is a logical fallacy. So either you have to reinterpret Purusha as Atman, or if you don't do that, then that Purusha cannot be equivalent to the Atman concept of Vedanta. That is Shankaracharya's view. But Vivekananda, coming in 19th century, he lived in a different age. He had to make some sense of Patanjali's system, especially Patanjali's conclusions. Patanjali begins and concludes with these dualistic or pluralistic interpretations of, there are two absolute, fundamental, eternal categories, Purusha and Prakriti. They are two different, they are eternal. So that's Patanjali's view. But Swamiji was addressing an audience who are not familiar with the different philosophical views of 8th century, during which Shankaracharya wrote his commentary. So Swamiji wanted to make some sense of Patanjali's concept of Purusha. So he actually interprets Purusha more or less like the Atman of Shankaracharya. So that's why you find Swamiji's interpretation is actually much more intelligible and philosophically more satisfying, because frequently he even replaces the word Purusha with the soul or self. Capital letter S Swamiji uses in place of Purusha. We Patanjali would not have agreed with. But Swamiji had to make some sense of this concept of one absolute unchanging reality, which is self-effulgent. So that's why the 18th Sutra says Natat Swabhasam. Natat here means Tatchit Swabhasam, Suprakas. It is not self-effulgent. The reason Drishyatvad. The reason is it is a Drishya. It is something that is seen. Chittam is an object seen, an object perceived by Purusha. That's the idea behind it. So for Purusha, Chittam is an object. For Chittam or mind, the external objects are objects. That's the idea behind it. So that's the idea behind it. Ekasamayecha ubhaya anavadharanam. Of course, this we will discuss later, maybe next class. You are most welcome to open questions. Most welcome. Thank you. Namaskar.
Hari Om Maharaj.
Hari Om.
Maharaj, basically a question based on your based on the description of how it is life or experiences are like something that is being projected on a screen, right? And this might be a stupid question, so just shut me down if I'm wrong. But on a screen, the interesting thing is what is happening on the screen and not the substrate. Like, nobody cares about the screen, but everyone cares about what is being shown on the screen. But in this particular case, we are asked to be interested in the screen itself and not what that is shown on the screen. So, is there any reason as to why we should focus more on the screen and not what is on the screen?
Yeah. When we face problems in this world, we sometimes forget the screen completely, and we get so obsessed with what is seen on the screen. Then perhaps it is a good idea to remember the screen is what really matters, not what are seen on the screen. So Sri Ramakrishna says, you keep jnanam somewhere in your pocket. Pocket means somewhere. And when you live in this world, you should have it easy, you can take out. Because then you know the world is mithya, the world is only relative, it is not absolute real, changes are natural, this world cannot be perfect. So that is Advaita Jnanam. So that should be kept somewhere. Maybe you need not carry it, you need not parade it. on your hand. But when you feel things are not going as you expected, you should remember this is how things are expected to go. You can't expect perfection in this imperfect world. So that's why the Sri Ramakrishna puts in beautiful language. It is something that you can keep somewhere in your pocket, and then you can take out, and that will help you in a big way. Everything is mithya in the sense, not unreal, but not absolutely real in that sense, changing things. So that's the idea behind. And you mentioned something interesting, when we actually see these impressions, perhaps we are not likely to remember it's a screen, that's true. But then, when these impressions become unbearable, become a problem, then we should remember, well, after some time, when the movie operator will switch off everything, then only screen is left of. Children cry and weep. Not only children, grown-up people also cry and weep like nightmares. That's actually when you see a nightmare, when you are actually experiencing it, you cry and weep. But when you come out, then you are actually seeing the screen in front of you. It's like that. So that aspect is very close to Vedanta. I think that's the reason why Swamiji gave this example of magic lantern. Mayavi is only reality. Magician is real. He's standing there. He was there all the time. Even this magic play was going on, when people were thinking all these terrible things were happening, he was sitting. Shankaracharya, bhumishto tishtati. The magician is standing there, maybe smiling. But people thought these terrible things were happening. So, Swamiji actually brings that idea in this context. This is connecting yoga with Vedanta. Yeah. Thank you for the question. Yeah.
Maharaj, my question on, you give an analogy of the Purusha concept in yoga is very similar to the Atman.
Yeah.
That understood, and the Chitta. How would you describe Prakriti in the context of Vedanta? That concept of Prakriti.
The Prakriti is like Vyavaharika Satta, the relative, the empirical world. You cannot wish away Prakriti, the empirical world. You are part of this empirical world, empirical experience are real only in the relative sense, but not absolute sense. So you cannot wish away its reality, but its reality is only relative in that sense. So Prakriti is more or less comparable to the Vyavaharika. It can be connected to the Vyavaharika concept of Vedanta. There are three levels of reality. Vyavaharika is the empirical, the everyday common sense experience that we go through, and the Paramarthika is the absolutely real, that which is beyond all time, space and causation, beyond all changes. So the Prakriti can be equated with that.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Patanjali has told us to take the help of Ishvara if necessary.
Yeah.
So that is Atman.
Yeah, that's true. Really, Patanjali's system expounds an Ishvara theory, but that Ishvara is different from the monotheistic Ishvara concept of any system of religious.
That is Saguna Brahman, not the Nirguna Brahmana of Vedanta.
Yeah, and then commentators like Vijnana Bhikshu, when he expounds these sutras, some of these sutras, not this sutra, he quotes from so many books, including Bhagavad Gita, many devotional classics he quotes. But mainstream yoga commentators sometimes don't do that. Yoga system is very interesting. Yoga claims to be a bit agnostic in the sense that it doesn't accept the monotheistic concept of a creator God. But really speaking, all the great commentators who wrote on Yoga Sutra were all great devotees. Something very interesting. Vijnana Bhikshu is not a Vijnana Bhikshu of Buddhist tradition. This Vijnana Bhikshu is different. He was a great devotee. He quotes from Gita, Upanishad, even Bhagavata and all he quotes Vijnana Bhikshu. So, the Ishvara concept of Patanjali is different. They are highly realized, advanced yogis who have gone ahead of us. Prakriti Purusha, they have gone ahead of us. That's their concept. But that's Patanjali's concept. Not a monotheistic God like Shiva, Vishnu or Maheshwara, Hindu tradition, or the monotheistic concepts of God in the Abrahamic traditions. That's not the idea of Patanjali. Patanjali has got a different... He is not the one who distributes, he is not the one who blesses you, who gives you a liberation, not that kind of God idea. You don't find that in Patanjali's system of yoga. Yeah.
In Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says that he is 1/4 is the Saguna and otherwise 3/4 is Nirguna. So that way means he is both Saguna and Nirguna. So if you think of Krishna as the Ishvara, then there has no dispute actually.
Yeah, that's for those who in Hindu tradition, there are so many denominations, so many traditions, depending upon their traditions. Yeah. Okay, Yogi, you were telling something. Please continue.
Pranam Maharaj.
Yeah.
In the previous lecture, you mentioned Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya is one realization from Vedantic perspective, and Brahma Satyam Jagat Satyam is higher realization.
Were you listening to today's class morning?
No, in the previous.
Okay, yeah.
Is Sankhya philosophy is saying exact same thing, like Brahma Satyam and Jagat Satyam both are real entities. Isn't that same? Both are same.
They're totally different, absolutely different. So Brahma Satyam, Jagat Mithya, Brahma Satyam, Jagat Satyam. Remember, Brahma Satyam, Jagat Satyam, Shankaracharya never uses that. He uses the word Brahma Satyam, Jagat Mithya. But in the Brahma Sutra Bhashya, at the end of the Chadasutri Bhashya, there is a statement, actually all these Aham Brahmasmi, all these experiences, Mahavakyas are relevant only at one level. When you actually realize Aham Brahmasmi, when you actually realize everything is Brahman, then you don't have to even mention the word Jagat or the word Mithya. Because the experience level of Brahma Satyam, Brahma Satyam, Jagat Mithya is different from the philosophical level. Brahma Satyam, Jagat Mithya is a philosophical doctrine. Its experience dimension is beyond its philosophical dimension. At the philosophical level, what you previously thought to be Jagat is now seen, experienced to be Brahman. So actually, Brahma Satyam, Jagat Satyam, there is the so-called Jagat is actually seen to be non-different, non-distinct from Brahman. This again can be explained in the light of, it is normally explained in the light of the Rajusarpa Bhranti analogy. See, when you see an object lying in a room which is not well lit, when there's not enough light in that room, you mistake that rope for a snake. And when you switch on the light, you bring light, actually the snake doesn't go away, because to begin with there was no snake. There was only snake idea, and the snake idea was not on the rope, it was in your head. So that snake idea goes away from your head, your mind. So what you previously thought to be misunderstood to be the snake is now seen to be the rope. Similarly, when you reach the experience level, what you previously thought to be this Jagat is now seen to be non-different from Brahman. So, that is in fact, Brahma Satyam, Jagat Satyam, that expression it doesn't occur anywhere in Shankaracharya's bhashyas. But Shankaracharya is a Sutya, Yuktya, Swanubhutya. So at Anubhuti level, you go beyond Muhavakyas. So in the Sutra, Shankaracharya Sutra, at the end of the Chatussutri, after Tattu Samanyaya, the Sutra, the Samanyaya Adhikaranam, you can find the quotations are coming. See the Aham Brahmasmi, all these Mahavakyas at one level. When you actually experience I am Brahman, then actually you don't make a proclamation about it. Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, that statement becomes, it doesn't become wrong, it becomes irrelevant when you go beyond that. That's why, it's everything is Brahman, everything is Atman. This idea is proclaimed again and again in the Bhashyas and Upanishads. Everywhere the same. So, the scope for saying Jagat Mithya, it is only, that scope is there only at a lower level, at the philosophical level, at the experience level, you go beyond that. That state is called Jivan Mukti. That state of Jivan Mukti. Jivan Mukta means now you understand it is only a rope. You don't go about looking for a snake, looking for a stick to drive away this snake. You don't do that. It's only a rope, you understood. Then there is a need to say, no, it is only a rope, not a snake. You don't say that when you actually switch on the light and you see for yourself, it's only a piece of rope. The snake idea becomes totally irrelevant.
So the Sankhya view that Prakriti and Purusha both eternal entities, two real entities, is that lower realization?
I don't say lower or higher, but it is Sankhya system is considered to be penultimate state before realizing the ultimate unity expounded in the Advaita Vedanta. So I don't really want to use the word lower or higher. That is a big dogmatic approach. What we need to see. Thank you.
If the Prakriti is changing, that means the existence is a temporary existence, or it is temporary reality, we can call it.
That's why the Prakriti can be understood in the context of Vyavaharika. Vyavaharika means changing, not absolute, relative entities. Anything subject to changes is Vyavaharika. True.
So, did Shankara, you said Shankara refuted Patanjali's or Shankha philosophy?
No, actually doesn't refute actually. He wrote a commentary on...
Did he fix it?
No, actually...
Did he try to correct it? Did he corrected it? Okay, so this is not right, you should have done this.
You see, the age of I didn't do that. Shankaracharya actually wrote a commentary called Vivarana. Vivarana is a commentary on Patanjali's Yoga Sutra based on Vyasa's commentary. So there are many ideas which come to that. And that Shankaracharya Vivarana commentary on Yoga Sutras based on Vyasa's commentary is not taken to be a very authentic text by himself in his system. It may be one of several books that he wrote. That's all.
So Vyasa came before Shankara.
Yeah, much before, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
There is a question from YouTube.
Yeah.
So what is one tip, Swamiji, to bring about the discernment faculty in the heat of the moment? We understand all these concepts by reading books and listening to the teachings, but to master is a challenge during hard situations.
Yeah.
This is in the context of that image and knowing that the screen is the reality. What is one tip?
One tip, okay. Yeah, to remember, even in the midst of our everyday activities, our involvement in different duties and responsibilities, if we can keep our mind fixed on a higher ideal, when we are engaged in different activities, responsibilities, business, industry, commerce, and all that, if we can keep all these belong to a realm of reality that is not eternal. It doesn't mean that we should retire, go away from it, not at all. Even in the midst of being involved in all these activities, we can somehow keep in our mind this fact that all these things are non-eternal, impermanent. It cannot be a negativistic or kind of retreating attitude. But it's a fact that we are forced to remember sometimes by our own experiences. So before that really comes, we can actually keep our mind focus on this fact, and then go about doing our duties and responsibilities. This idea. That's what we can do.
Kind of like the Ishvara Pranidhana that you mentioned.
Yeah. So thank you. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Ki Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.